My name is Erica Walker, and I've led what you would call a terrible existence. I guess you could say it started with the lack of a proper father figure in my life. That's right. I'm fully intending on blaming my shit on daddy issues. What else is new? Let me just lay it all out on the table. My whole life, I've pretty much been fucked up and broken to be completely void of basic human emotions. To compartmentalize, to separate myself from myself. It's how I've been programmed. It's how I was raised. My mother died giving birth to me. I guess you could say that my father blamed me for her death. It's a wonder he didn't ship me off to be raised in the foster system. Sometimes I think maybe I wouldn't have turned out like I did if I wasn't raised by a psychopath. I heard it's catching. All I remember about that son of a bitch's personality is that he had this wicked temper and had me cleaning up his messes since I was 10. I've practically become a professional on scrubbing caked-on blood off concrete floors and in between tiles. Grout really likes to hold on to blood, but I know the trick. The first time I walked in on Joe carving up a screaming woman, I was 7. I guess I stood in the door too long. I was unable to look away, and then he grabbed me and shoved me in a corner. His hand left a sticky, bloody handprint on the upper part of my arm. I couldn't stop staring at this oddly bright red color against my pale skin. It was hypnotizing. He made me watch him, yelling at me awful things about the woman. His voice was grating and scary all at the same time. "She's nothing but a stupid whore, just like your mother and just like you," he would say. Looking back, I'm still a little confused as to how I was labeled a whore at 7, but oh well, don't question the psychopathic dad, right? He made me sit in a corner for the next hour while he cut up this lady bit by bit. She wouldn't stop screaming. She wouldn't shut up, and I remember covering my ears and feeling tears sting my eyes, begging for the screaming to stop, but not saying a single word. Joe was maniacal. He kept laughing at her and taunting her with horrible words. Once, she even looked over at me. Her eyes were wide. Her pupils were so big that I couldn't even tell what color her eyes were. And then that is when she stopped screaming. She died. I watched the life leave her eyes. She was so fucking scared, and her eyes were just locked on mine, and I couldn't look away. I remember looking up at my father when I stood and came up next to him. The sight should have made me faint or lose my dinner all over the floor. It should have given me nightmares. It was straight out of a horror movie. Her insides were now outsides. The metal table was completely covered in blood. There was so much blood, and it was so dark compared to the bloody handprint Joe left on my arm. There were dark puddles and smears somehow all over the room. I didn't know how they got there, but at the time I really didn't want to know. And I distinctly remember the blood spatter on Joe's left cheek. He didn't even bother to wipe it off. I asked him why. Just a simple question. I really don't even know what I was asking for. What could he possibly say to defend that, you know? But instead of an answer, I was met with the back of his hand across my face. He had left another angry smear of sticky blood. He told me never to question him again. He told me if I breathed a word of what I saw that I would be next, that he would cut me up into little pieces and no one would ever know. No one would even notice because no one cared about me. I was a worthless piece of shit and surely not to be missed. Tears stung my eyes and I walked up the stairs to get out of the basement. I wouldn't have to witness my father filleting another woman until the next summer. I was 8, and this time he sought me out to force me to watch. He even gave me a chair to sit on. I remember it clear as day. It was the first time he ever did anything for me to make me comfortable. It was the first time he ever showed any interest in spending time with me or being in the same room with me. It was also the first time he gave me a piece of advice. The sharper the better, he had said as he held up his dagger, his favorite dagger. This time, he didn't let me stay for the whole time. Even though she was cut up pretty bad and bleeding all over the floor, she was still in there and wouldn't stop crying. He made me go upstairs and shut the door behind me. He had been calling her his little fighter. The sound of his belt buckle being undone was subtle as I walked up the stairs, but I heard it. I wanted to cry for the woman, but she had to be punished, and that was that. I was not to question him. When I was 15, Joe made me drop out of high school and pack my things up. We were moving again, and wherever we were heading, Joe told me that I needed to find a job. There was no other option. School was a distraction. Money needed to be made, and he couldn't do it on his own. At the time, I kind of doubted that he couldn't afford to support us both, but I knew the truth. He wanted me busy. He wanted me to work on my people skills, because I was always so shy, and he hated how I had trouble speaking to strangers. I was not to question him. I got a job at a small grocery store, and I even made a friend. Her name was Amanda, with pretty dark hair. She was nice enough and tried to get me to sleep over a few times and hang out, but Joe wouldn't allow it. You see, he was always a mean son of a bitch who had the knack for a swift, stinging, backhanded slap. It was like a damn art form how he did it, like swinging a golf club, always with the follow-through. I never got used to it. Between the insults and the name-calling and the backhands, I was pretty much a broken tool by the time I was 10, so the thought of rebelling never crossed my mind. I knew my place. I knew how unloved and worthless I was, because he told me. He told me how no one would ever care about me or love me. I'd never marry or have kids because God hated me. Yes, God. No, my father wasn't a religious man. Far from it, actually, but if God won't even love you, who will, right? So when he said no, it meant no. On my 16th birthday, Joe had me dragging a woman from the back of his car. All his women were always blonde. At the time, I didn't know why, but I knew it was important. It was the most important. I know why now. Anyway, she was awkwardly crunched up inside the trunk, tied up, and heavily drugged. I never knew how he got these women back to the house. He would teach me that later. I didn't even know how he lured them to him. Again, he would teach me that later. Joe wasn't a particularly handsome man, but he was charismatic. Too charismatic. He was the kind of man who could probably walk into a sleazy car dealership and walk out with the clothes off their backs. Yes, I am exaggerating, but I think you get my point. When I finally got her to the basement, Joe had me tie her down. He had never let me participate in his hobbies like this before. I think at that point he was starting to trust me, and I did a good job in tying her down, making sure she was secure. I know this because Joe gave me a half nod before pushing me away from the table. Anyways, her arms were spread out, legs tied together and fastened to the end of the table. Tight knots, knots you have to cut off. At the time, I wondered how long he would keep this up, how long he planned on killing these innocent women just for his own twisted amusement. And at the time, I thought it was an alarming thought, but it had crossed my mind. Would he ever let me join him? Would he expect me to continue on with his psychopathic agenda? There was, as you can see, the psycho Erica part of me, even at 16, even at 9 or 10, which hoped, wished, prayed that one day Joe would take me under his wing and mentor me. Because if this made him feel alive and happy, well, I wanted that too, even though I didn't deserve it. And you know what? He did take me under his wing, and we worked together for 20 more years before I hung him by his feet and slit his throat.